Alright YouTube, one of my subscribers asked me to make a video about ancient aliens. That's the concept, not the TV series, that is. The idea that aliens, extraterrestrial life of some form or type, has affected our development, maybe even gave rise to the human, cultures and technology that we see, perhaps even manipulate our genetics in some way for literally creating man from what was primitive, Homo erectus or something. I would say it's possible. I would say it's also more likely than some of the creation explanations that have been dreamt up by various religious groups. I would say if you look at the claims of, for instance, the Bible, the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition of how the world was created and how humans came to be, they don't make a lot of sense. And I know that the ancient aliens hypothesis people, they have a tendency to very liberally apply anything which could be construed as our understanding of extraterrestrials. They sort of liberally apply it to those religious concepts, saying, well, God was an extraterrestrial, this biblical passage mentions, wheels in the sky, it must be UFOs. Which is one weakness I see in the ancient aliens theories. But I would say it's much more likely than the sort of religious myths at explaining how we came to be. I still think the most likely explanation is, of course, it's the evolution of our biology, then our language, then our, culture and technology separately, sort of going up and up each time. And of course now there's the computer age, and that could be said to be, we're almost creating artificial intelligence ourselves. But I would say that the ancient aliens theory does hold some water. If you look at the things said in various religious texts, historical texts, any of a number of different things, it does indicate at least the possibility that extraterrestrials at one time or another have affected our human culture. Now, of course, if you look at all of the evidence of aliens, of extraterrestrial, I would say personally it's 100% certain to me that there's life on other planets. There are innumerable numbers of galaxies throughout this universe. There are galaxies far larger than ours. These contain trillions upon trillions upon trillions, probably, of planets. Very recently, with new upgrades in telescopic devices, we've noticed that there are actually quite a few planets roughly equivalent to Earth in size and possibly in composition that we simply didn't see before. Before we could only see the larger planets. Now we can see smaller planets. We're realizing that Earth is actually a relatively common planet size, that this planet is actually, relatively average. It's actually not that small or large. Of course, if we looked at the composition of our own solar system, we could have seen that, but they didn't take that logical step for some reason. So I would say, yes, there's life on other planets. I do believe that. As for intelligent life, probably, because if we're assuming that the universe is gigantic, which it is, we have to assume there's probably millions of planets out there with life on them. Some of it's probably much more advanced than us. Some of it's probably roughly on par with what we would consider, civilized, technologically capable. And some of the planets are probably filled with nothing but slime mold. It's just a mathematical gradient. It's sort of looking at, a wave function or something like that, a graph of averages, a bell curve. We're probably most likely somewhere in the middle of that bell curve. There are a few groups that are probably intensely advanced. They might be immortal by now and, do time travel. That is possible within physics. It is theoretically possible. There are these immortal races running around that unless you were to physically kill them, they would live forever and just keep regenerating themselves. Maybe clonal masses of big amoeba creatures, for all we know. But anyway, the idea that they've interacted with us, I'd say, is also possible. If we assume that there are alien groups that are more advanced than us, and if we assume we're roughly average, we'd make a good test study for, biological purposes. Maybe our planet has some resource that's scarce in their particular sector, and they just decided to have us mine it for them, as the Sumerians with the Anunnaki myth suggest, that the gods sort of came down and made man to mine gold. That is possible. I wouldn't say that particular theory is quite likely, but it is possible. I would say more likely what we see in human culture may be the result of extraterrestrial contact. It is quite strange that thousands of years ago, with stone and copper tools, humans were making things like Stonehenge, or the Great Pyramid, or the pyramids of the Mayans, or any of these other structures. It does seem rather odd. Number one, we can't exactly figure out why they created them in the first place. Many of them also have a cosmic alignment to them. The Great Pyramid lines up with several other pyramids to roughly shadow one of the constellations. The Mayans and the Aztecs in these groups were building things that were almost obsessed with mathematics. Number one, how did they develop such an obsession? And number two, what possible purpose did it serve them? It serves no utilitarian purpose whatsoever. We have to assume that it's spiritual, but where did spirituality come from? Now, of course, some people would say it comes from psychedelics. Well, that still doesn't explain why it extrapolated itself into mathematics. It seems possible that that comes from extraterrestrials. Not certain, of course, we can't know for certain. But if you look at contemporary evidence, look on YouTube, there's lots of videos of, unidentified flying objects, unidentified submerged objects in some cases. Some are obvious hoaxes, they're CGI animation. Some of them you can't debunk. It comes on the news every once in a while. With this recent Arizona dust storm, they recorded two weird silvery objects in the sky that were essentially lifting slowly off the ground, and then one of them zoomed off roughly in a diagonal direction. Now, you would think that during a dust storm there wouldn't be that many planes taking off and landing, and they weren't military planes, and we know that for a fact. So what were these objects? We can't know for sure. Maybe it was just debris. That's possible, but their movements suggest otherwise. So there is contemporary evidence. People have seen extraterrestrials. People have seen craft that they believe to be of extraterrestrial origin. I find it slightly funny, and I'll digress slightly into my own anti-religious nature here. I find it slightly funny that people have no problem believing that the world was created in 6 days by a being who created us out of clay, and yet they have intense problems with the idea that aliens even exist, let alone affected human culture in any way. I find that slightly strange. I would think that the latter has a little bit more evidence. We can see at least videos and pictures and so forth of what is supposedly extraterrestrial objects or beings. We have no such evidence for any of the claims of any of the mainstream religions. We don't have a picture of God, so to speak. But we do have pictures of UFOs, many of which are obvious hoaxes, some of which not so much. And of course, in ancient history, Alexander the Great was recording about some craft that came down from the sky and scared his elephants when he was trying to attack the Indians, and as a result of losing that battle, he was turned back from invading and essentially conquering the known world, because India was the edge of the known world at the time, and thus we have to keep the possibility at least in mind. Maybe these extraterrestrials do affect our actions, our technology, and so forth, for some unknown reason. I mean, it could be aliens are going to come down from the sky on December 21st and start talking to people in some weird language we won't understand and showing us all sorts of wonderful things. It's possible. I don't think that's likely, but it is feasible. But, I mean, and I don't believe in Roswell or any of the conspiracy nonsense. I think the idea that a spacecraft manned by life intelligent enough to come from at least another, side of the galaxy probably would not deliberately or accidentally crash a craft onto this planet. I think that's somewhat unlikely. I think it's unlikely that these beings would be concerned with being shot down and so forth. I don't believe in the Area 51 nonsense. I think that's just an air base. We can see it from the sky. It's composed of runways. It has planes actively there. That's an Air Force base. The reason why it's top secret, they're probably developing secret aircraft there because it happens to be a remote area with a large, essentially what amounts to a crater surrounded by mountains. It's a pretty secure area to build such things. But I do think it is possible that aliens in ancient times, and perhaps even in more modern times, have affected our culture. It's very possible, I would say even possibly likely. I think it's likely in the future because, obviously, life on other planets, as I said, almost certainly exists. I think it's likely we will have contact with those beings when we're ready. I think they would predominantly be waiting for several things. Number one, to see if we become a little less warlike. Because if let's put yourselves in the shoes of an alien. We're assuming that this is an advanced race that no longer wars with itself. Would you want to give alien technology to creatures that would primarily turn it into weapons? Probably not. Number one, they may eventually become a threat to you. Number two, they would definitely be a threat to one another, and if your intent is to help or affect these beings in some way, for your own purposes or for theirs, you don't want them wiping one another out. It just doesn't make sense. So I would say they would be looking for, number one, to see if we're less warlike. Number two, do we take an active role in communicating with them? I would say the SETI project is somewhat limited. It's attempting to receive signals from other locations. Why don't we have some sort of system to attempt to broadcast to other locations? We should be broadcasting, light patterns or computer wave, radio waves or whatever. We should be putting them out into space if we really wanted to attract some other race here. The best way to do that wouldn't be to wait for them to contact you. That's like waiting for a phone call from somebody that you want to call. It just doesn't make sense. You wouldn't wait for a phone call from somebody that you don't even know personally. You would call them up on the phone and talk to them. SETI is a little bit, naive in its construction. It's assuming that somebody wants to contact us and or has some, broadcast going on to find us, but where's our broadcast to find them? So that would be my take on SETI and all that nonsense. It's probably not going to be fruitful and is a waste of billions of dollars of taxpayer money. The roots of the space program. Oh, well, aliens might be out there. We want them to ally with the United States and not talk to those Russians who become communists. In a way. But anyway, yeah, I think it's likely that aliens have affected our technology. And if you look at some of the things the ancients created, I can't remember the name of the place, but there's one particular location on some island. They have these weird H-shaped blocks that are completely incised. They're absolutely perfect angles. You can tell they were literally machined. You could not create that effect with stone or even iron tools. How did they get there? And there's one city over in India, or Pakistan, I can't remember, that appears to have undergone some sort of nuclear blast, dating back several thousand years. Where did that come from? Literally, the material of the walls of the structures has been glazed by high heat. Like, there was obviously an explosion there of some sort. There's no geographic evidence that a natural explosion occurred. Where did the explosion come from? And of course, local folklore suggests that it came from some figure called Garuda, which they identify almost in a way that makes you think it's some sort of aircraft. I could go on and on. I could make like a 20-part series to this, but unfortunately I can't. But you should watch the Ancient Aliens documentaries. It is somewhat interesting, the things that they've found, and does lead one to wonder if indeed extraterrestrials had something to do with human culture, as I think it's probable that they have. Really, life probably is on other planets. Therefore, it probably at least has the ability to get here, and probably, therefore, does. Peace out.